Well, ladies, in this video, I have Jenny in the studio, which I'm really excited about to have you. Welcome, Jenny.
Thanks.
And we are continuing in our series, Women of the Old Testament, Stories That Changed History. And today, we're going to talk about Abigail. And Jenny, I don't know about you, but Abigail was a person that I wasn't very familiar with. But as I've gotten to know her, I really like her. Mm-hmm. So what were your initial thoughts about Abigail?
Just her courage and her humbleness.
Yes.
I think that she came from a really hard life, not a great home life, and she managed to bring the good out of things.
Yes.
That attitude is just so incredible to me.
Yes.
So.
And what we're going to learn in the story is just how brave and how humble. She was awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Abigail's an awesome lady, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so to unpack her story a little bit, we want to first answer this question. How does Abigail's story fit into the story of the whole Bible? That's been kind of the heart behind this whole series. We really want people to understand more about the Old Testament and who some of these amazing women were and how they were a part of the story. You know, from Genesis to Revelation, there's a story and it all points to Jesus. And so Abigail's another person in the story that points to Jesus. So to understand where Abigail falls into the overall story of the Bible, we find that her story starts when Samuel's life ends. And in another one of our videos in this series, we talked about Hannah, who had prayed earnestly to God for a child for a very long time and finally was blessed with Samuel. Mm-hmm. But then she dedicates Samuel to the priest Eli, and he goes on to be a prophet and the last in the line of judges. And Samuel's the guy that anoints Saul, the first king of Israel, and anoints David, who was the next guy in line to be king. And Jesus falls in the line of David. So we see how this is moving closer and closer to the story of Jesus. But so for Samuel, he dies and everyone had been at his funeral. And now the story of Abigail picks up after Samuel dies and David is roaming around. So why don't you pick up that from there?
So David's wandering because Saul feels threatened by the fact that, there's actually an end to
my reign.
And so he's kind of taking it out on David. Okay. And so David's on the run. He's essentially a fugitive. He's hiding. And he finds himself in this land that is owned by Nabal. And Nabal is Abigail's husband.
Okay.
And so he's just really well off. Let's just leave it that way. And he's got tons of flocks, which David takes it upon himself for him and his men to watch after. And he makes sure that nothing happens to them, which is incredibly honorable.
Noble, nice.
Very noble, yeah. And but then the tables are kind of turned and David needs help. He needs food for his men. And so he sends people to approach Nabal and ask for help and for food. And Nabal just blows him off. And it's very arrogant, I think, to be honest. And so David is livid. He's hurt, he's heartbroken, he's frustrated.
His pride's probably a little wounded, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we know David is a really passionate man. So he's kind of seeing red.
He's not taking kindly to Nabal.
On the warpath. He gathers up some of his men and he's ready to go find his own version of justice, his own idea of justice, which probably would have been really intimidating, I think.
Yes.
And here enters Abigail. Which is just so interesting.
Which is awesome, and I'm so excited. We'll come back to that part of the story because it really is amazing. But before we tell what Abigail does and what happens with how she enters into the scene between these two men with fighting egos, right?
Yeah.
I thought it would be good to answer the next question, though, first, which is, what was Abigail's story? Who was Abigail? Because I think if we get an understanding of her, then we understand more about why she could do what she did in intervening on David's behalf. So what we know about Abigail is, unfortunately, we don't know a ton about her. What we know is her name meant full of joy, which, like you said, she was living a not so easy life. She was married to a jerk. Yeah. And so I'm sure her home life was hard, but yet, as we see in Abigail, she was a woman that was full of joy. She found the good in situations. And we also know that if she wasn't Jewish, she was at least trained or taught or had an understanding of at least the Jewish traditions, as we see in how she speaks to David. Yeah. She knew who David was. She knew that he had been anointed as the next king of Israel. But other than that, we don't know a ton about her lineage or where she came from. But what else did we discover about Abigail?
Oh my gosh, she was beautiful and smart. She had the brains and the beauty.
Good combo.
And yeah, I think that was fun to discover. And she spoke truth and love. She had tact and grace along with all of her knowledge. Which I thought was really neat. And she was married to an unbeliever. So that must have been really useful during that time frame, just choosing an attitude to honor her husband regardless of
Right.
what he was choosing to do.
Which would be very difficult to do.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I think that it was really neat, the special relationship she must have had with the servants, because they came to her when they realized Nabal wasn't going to do anything. And actually what he was doing was bringing the wrath of David to them. And so they go to Abigail for help. And that's so unprecedented during this time frame, just realizing that the relationship that they had with her, like, Abigail can help.
Right. Let's go to Abigail. She's the level-headed one.
Yeah. And so they come to her and ask for help.
That's good.
So
that's good insight. And I think we find out why. Probably the servants are like, Nabal is a crazy man. Abigail's the only one with her head on her shoulders. Let's go get her. So that kind of gives us a good bridge back to the story.
Yeah.
Because we have David, like you said, on the warpath, and he's coming to seek revenge. Like, listen, Nabal, how dare you deny me help when I've been out here protecting your livestock and your men all this time?
Yeah.
So what does Abigail do? She finds out about this situation, this confrontation, and she goes into action mode, and she gathers up supplies. And she goes out to meet David where he was, which I can't even imagine what that would be like as a woman. Like you said, unprecedented for a woman to come insert herself in a situation between two men. And because David, who David was, and he was angry, that would be a very intimidating setting.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But yet she steps into it. In fact, I think it would be good for us to go to the text and read that whole exchange.
For sure. So we're starting in 1 Samuel chapter 25. Verse 23. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed low before him. She fell at his feet and said, I accept all blame in this matter, my lord. Please listen to what I have to say. I know Nabal is a wicked and ill-tempered man. Please don't pay any attention to him. He is a fool, just as his name suggests. But I never even saw the young men you sent. Now, my lord, as surely as the Lord lives, and you yourself live, since the Lord has kept you from murdering and taking vengeance into your own hands, let all your enemies and those who try to harm you be as cursed as Nabal is. And here's a present that I, your servant, have brought to you and your young men. Please forgive me if I have offended you in any way. The Lord will surely reward you with a lasting dynasty, for you are fighting the Lord's battles, and you have not done wrong throughout your entire life. When the Lord has done all he promised and has made you leader of Israel, don't let this be a blemish on your record. Then your conscience won't have to bear the staggering burden of needless bloodshed and vengeance. And when the Lord has done these great things for you, please remember me, your servant.
Yeah, just powerful. I mean, this goes right into what the next question is. What can we learn from Abigail's story? And I think what we learned through that exchange with David is that she was coming as a peacemaker. She was coming humbly, taking on that role of, listen, we're the ones in the wrong here. Even though Abigail had nothing to do with Nabal and his attitude, she took that responsibility on herself because she wanted to make peace, because she wanted to reconcile that relationship. She wanted to build a bridge. She was humble and she was patient. What else do we learn from Abigail in that situation?
I think just the idea of we can speak either words of life or words of death.
Yes.
We can be a peacemaker, we can be a peacebreaker.
That's true.
And there's a lot that comes with that. Are we willing to swallow our own pride? Like, choose humbleness? Are we willing to give up our right to be right in a situation? Which I think is really powerful. This all comes back to pointing to this idea of how are we bringing people to God? Mm-hmm. And if we want to really do this right, we have to reflect Jesus' attitude of love and patience and humbleness. The big picture of bringing people and pointing them to Jesus.
Right. Because what Abigail did in that story was that she was like, hey, remember who you are. Remember, you're the next king of Israel. You don't want to do this act of vengeance, which could just totally derail your whole thing and just totally dishonor God. So remember the big win, not your own version of justice. Which I think, again, as we transition to this last point, which we have in every one of our videos in this series, is, you know, God used Abigail to change history. He used Abigail to change the course of history for David's sake. And he can do the same thing for us. You know, in our relationships, we can be known either as peacemakers or we can be known as people that just create dissension. We can model for our kids that we do everything we can to reconcile relationships, that we show love and humility. Like you said, that we point people to Jesus instead of turning away from him.
Yeah.
How else would you say God can use our stories?
Oh, I think it's so critical, the trust.
Yes.
That has to come from, it can only come from walking with God.
Yes.
And trusting that his big picture, even though it might not make sense to us in the moment, when we're emotional,
Right.
when we're tired, when we're hurt.
That's right.
To be able to step back and say, God, I trust that you have a bigger plan here.
That's
so I'm going to work for showing love and
Right.
patience.
And it can change the whole trajectory of our life when we let God lead
Absolutely.
instead of our own emotions. Great.
Yeah.
Well, we could talk about Abigail all day long, I think. But Jenny, I thank you for being here today. And ladies, use the questions below, have a conversation, learn more about Abigail. She was a powerful force. We also have homework. Make sure to check out the homework that we have. That gives you more time for self-reflection and to learn a little bit more about how God wants to change your own heart in your own life. So I hope you enjoyed our time talking about Abigail, and we'll see you in the next video.